when it does what you want it to do. So first of all, thank you all for being here today. I am so delighted to be with you and to hear more from Kevin about the Renew My Church initiative and the work that you are doing in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And thank you also for those of you who are able to do the little pre-survey that helped me to form our content for today. So because of that, I know that many of you are looking for the logistical, the practical, I want a schedule, I want a curriculum, I want a best practice, and we'll get there. So our time today is really going to be spent reflecting on some of the ideas about families and catechesis that come from our church documents. And both Deb and Kevin have referred to the resource guide for family catechesis, which kind of looks like this. And you will receive one for participating today. And that was the first big project that I worked on during my time here at RCL Benziger. And part of that's because my previous experiences in parishes and in dioceses, and I really love working with families. And I think that the holiness that exists in families and the opportunity that we have to point to the sacred stuff that's already in their lives is really remarkable. And so family catechesis is one of my favorite experiences and some of the most frustrating things that I have done in ministry. And so I am happy to be here to share some insights and some thoughts with you today. The other thing that I want to add is that you will be receiving a copy of this resource. And in the time since we published this resource, two major things have happened. And the first one is that we had a global pandemic. And the second one is that the Directory for Catechesis was released about a year ago. So I am really focusing some of my comments today around this stuff, the goodness that is in the Directory for Catechesis, because that does not appear in the document, in the resource you're getting, because we'd already published it at that point. So just taking a moment to think, in the past year, we have spent more time with our households, with our families, and for some that meant we were spending less time with our extended families. And for many, this has been a great experience, and for others, that has been a trial. And we have heard the same thing here at RCL Benziger. We've heard the same thing from different dioceses. We have heard that some families loved the increased number of opportunities to do faith formation at home, that they've just had a great experience of faith being together. And we've also heard that some did not like this approach at all, and that they can't wait to get back to normal, whatever that means. But we have an opportunity as a church to take the next faithful step toward ministry in a new way, toward ministry with families in a new way. And so I thank you for responding to that opportunity and to the call to the church. And so before we really jump into the nitty gritty, I want you to think about your own experience of family faith formation. And so we're going to send you to breakout rooms and you'll have just 5 minutes. So you have to be brief, but I would like you to share one aspect of faith that you learned from your family. So again, one aspect of faith, but you have to be brief, that you learned from your family. And Deb, you can go ahead and send them off.
All right.
So as you are returning, first of all, thank you for taking that time to share with one another. But as you are returning, please respond. True or false, all families form children. And you can go ahead and place your response in the chat. Is it true or false that all families form children? Dan jumped right in there. Dan says it's true. Once again, as you return, thank you for taking the time to share. And I invite you as you're returning to respond to that true or false statement up there. Place your answer in the chat. True or false, all families form children. So Deb, is everyone back? Just give me a thumbs up if that's, we all back?
Yep.
All right. So thank you again for your time together. And all of you have responded true. I had one for better or for worse in there. One said they don't always form them positively in the faith. And that is absolutely true. The answer is true. All families form children in something. And that is why the household, while the home, the family is given such high regard by the church, is that the church recognizes the irreplaceable role of families. And especially the role that families play in our early formation, again, for better or for worse, we say true, depending on what examples they give their kids. Because you are in the Archdiocese of Chicago, I'm sure some of your families are forming their children to be Cubs fans or to not be Cubs fans. And maybe they are forming them to be competitive. We joke that in my family, being competitive is genetic. That is part of what we were formed in my childhood. I actually was not raised Catholic. I was raised in a predominantly Baptist tradition. I was baptized in the Church of the Brethren. And so I was raised in the faith, but my parents will tell you that I abandoned the faith that I was raised in. And so we have to remember that what happens in families has always, that God is always present there, that we have the potential to recognize the sacredness. And so we need to remember that families are good. And that needs to be one of our starting points as we go into family catechesis. So I mentioned that several of you played my reindeer games and responded to this little survey. And so what comes to mind when you think of family faith formation? And so lots of answers here. So one in which the whole family is catechized, parents accompanying children, opportunity for parents to be primary catechists, helping families, evangelizing and forming the whole family, families going to mass and praying together, families praying and learning together, helping parents to pass on the faith to their children. And so as you can see here, there are as many different ideas about family faith formation as there are different types of families. And so while we can set out with the goal of forming families in the faith, how we get there can take many different approaches. And so that's part of what we're going to talk through today is what do we need to keep in mind so that we select an approach that really embraces that accompaniment model, that really meets families where they are and invites them to journey into something deeper. And so as we go through our time today, I would like for you to keep in mind one or two specific families. So it might be your own family. It might be a family that you engage with in faith formation. But I don't want this to be your ideal family. What do I mean by that? Not focusing on the ones who always turn their paperwork in on time or who are always eager to do those activities that you send home. We love them, God loves them, there is a special place for them, but they're not going to be our focus today. I want you to think of that family that is constantly apologizing for being late. Or perhaps they are the one that in pre-COVID times, they were running in with one kid in a sports uniform and the other kid is still chewing his dinner as he's coming through the door. Maybe you have a family that is always asking for an exception. Maybe you're thinking of the parent who is divorced and only has their kids every other weekend. Might be a family that was really reluctant to go to home formation through COVID, but then ended up liking it. Or, that parent who cannot wait to get her kids back into normal CCD. Okay, so think through, those are your families right now. Okay, now that you have your family in mind, our new-ish directory for catechesis, it's about a year old at this point, tells us that the family is a proclamation of faith, in that it is the natural place in which faith can be lived in a simple and spontaneous manner. And it continues saying, on this human base, Christian initiation is more profound. The awakening of the sense of God, the first steps in prayer, education of the moral conscience, formation in the Christian sense of human love, understood as a reflection of the love of God the Father. It is indeed a Christian education that is more witnessed to than taught, more occasional than systematic, more ongoing and daily than structured into periods. And so this is part of those shifts that Kevin was talking about as part of that renewal method, is that family faith formation, especially family faith formation that is happening in the home, has this tendency to be more organic, that it is infusing faith into daily experiences, into situations. So one way to think about this is, how do we give families the tools to do a theological reflection, to be that mystagogue in their own life? And so I would like for you to think about that family that I just asked you to call to mind for a minute. And so what does these first steps of prayer look like in their household? How are they forming their children and their moral conscience? Do you even know? So going back to the not so new, in 1994, the bishops in the United States released a pastoral message to families. And at that time, the US bishops named 13 ways families live out the mission of the church in the home. So this is a summary of a section of this larger document. So I'm going to send you my slides, and the document is linked here. So you can read the whole document, but we're just going to do a quick review of these 13 ways that families live the mission of the church in their home. So the mission of the church of the home. And so the first one, again, just going through these quickly, you carry out that mission when you believe in God and you believe that God cares about you. You live out that mission when you love and you never give up believing in the value of another person. When you foster intimacy in appropriate ways for the whole family. When you evangelize by professing faith in God, acting in accord with gospel values, and setting an example of Christian living. When you educate and your example is your most effective way to teach. When you pray together, thanking God for blessings, reaching for strength, asking guidance in crisis and in doubt. Kevin was talking about that. We have so many families that are struggling with COVID and everything that's happened in the last year. Are they reaching out for that guidance? You carry out the mission of the church when you serve one another, often sacrificing your own wants for the other's good. And when you forgive and seek reconciliation. Continuing, the bishops say, you carry out the mission of the church of the home when you celebrate life, birthdays, weddings, births, deaths, the first day of school, dare I say the last day of school, rites of passage, holy days, and holidays. When you welcome the stranger, the lonely one, the grieving person into your home, you are carrying out the mission of the church. When you act justly in your community, and it continues in that passage to specifically name to eradicate discrimination and racism, homelessness, poverty, and illiteracy, among others. You carry out the mission of the church when you affirm life as a precious gift from God, and when you raise up vocations to the priesthood and religious life as you encourage your children to listen for God's call and respond to God's grace. So again, this comes from the 1994 document called Follow the Way of Love. And so in this next slide here, I apologize for the smaller font here, but I have included on a side-by-side here the 13 points that come from Follow the Way of Love. Again, that was a letter from 1994, but also the mission imperatives from the Archdiocese's Renew My Church. And so I went and kind of poked around on your website to find these. So Kevin's slides will give you some more direction there, but you see that there are some really significant overlaps here. And that's intentional, because the wisdom of the church has long said and is reiterated in the Joy of Love, which was the document that followed the Synod on Families, that the church is good for families and that families are good for the church. And so once again, I want you to drop over in the chat, when it comes to supporting families and preparing them for mission, so the mission of the family, which of the 13 areas from Follow the Way of Love do you believe your parish is best supporting and resourcing families? So our bishop said, in these 13 ways, when families do these 13 things, they are living out the mission of the church at home. So which of those are you best preparing families for living out that mission? And go ahead and put that in the chat. Thank you. Amy says serving one another. Serving one another. Educating. Yeah. Celebrating life. I think that's probably my favorite, if I'm being completely honest. So as you continue to think through these, I want to show you once again your oh, now they're coming in quickly. Praying together, loving and believing in the value of others. These are awesome, praying together. So as you continue to put those in the chat, I'm going to show you another slide from that pre-survey that you all did. And so we ask, where has your parish been successful? So it's a very similar question, and I gave you these 5 areas to rank here. And the
Amy,
interesting,
I'm going to hop in real quick. Did you say you were sharing a slide on this? We're seeing the
are
other
you not seeing
slide.
my other screen over here?
No, we're not. I think you were showing it earlier and we hadn't seen that one either. So,
well, thank you for telling me
Okay.
that. Hold on one second. Let me see if I
Thanks.
can get that while they're still up there.
Okay.
Did it pop up there?
Nope, not yet.
All right. Well, then I'll just tell you what it said.
Perfect. Thanks.
So in the 5 areas that I offered you as possibilities for engaging in faith, where has your parish been successful? The average, you said you were most successful in providing pastoral care and resources to families. And then the next one was providing catechetical experiences. And the lowest of those that I asked, how have you done this? You said engaging families in all areas of parish life. And so I just give that as a sense of, sometimes it feels very lonely to work in catechetical ministry. And we are all kind of all over the place as we look at the best ways to work with our families and to help provide them with these tools. But when we think of family faith formation, sometimes we get really caught up in the, that part that has a curriculum and has a book and has a sequence and has a course of study. And that is very important. It may not be the best starting point for your families. You may need to start in a different place where you are showing them kind of how can they celebrate life and recognize that that's part of the mission of the church, that that's part of who they are as Catholics. How can you help them to recognize that when they love and believe in one another, that that's part of what God is calling them to? That might be a starting point that works for the families in your community. So moving on, the Directory for Catechesis then describes the relationship between parishes and families as reciprocal. And so it says the Christian community is a family of families. I don't know about you all, but I have been in some parishes that have been pretty dysfunctional families. We haven't all gotten along very well. But for better or for worse, our Christian community is a family of families, and it is the family of God. And so the community and the family are for each other a constant and reciprocal point of reference. While the community receives from the family an understanding of the faith that is immediate and connected in a natural way to the affairs of life, the family receives from the community an explicit key for using faith to reinterpret its experience. And so Kevin was talking about that when he said, we know families are suffering. Those are what families are giving to us as people of faith. They're saying, these are the affairs of my life, and this is the stuff that's really hard right now. And what they should be receiving from us are those keys on how to use faith to interpret that experience. And that's what they should be getting from us. And I think this is sometimes, maybe not in any of your parishes, but I think this is sometimes where we miss the mark with family catechesis, because we think the families come to our parish to get faith formation. They get the lesson, they get the directions, they get the activities, but we don't necessarily recognize that families have as much to teach us as a community of faith about what's happening. So how do we take into consideration, how do we even make those opportunities to hear their struggles in everyday life and the stuff that we're sending home for that formal faith formation experience? How do we make a time and a place where they can come share with us? This is the natural, these are the affairs of my life. This is the stuff that's really hard right now. And so the directory continues to remind us that catechesis must involve the real stuff of our lives. It says, moreover, in the dynamic of missionary conversion, catechesis with families is characterized by a style of humble understanding and by a proclamation that is concrete, not theoretical or detached from personal problems. So, it is not appropriate to say, yes, I know there is a global pandemic going on, but have you learned about the Sacred Heart of Jesus? Do you know the 10 Commandments? So we have to provide catechesis that is tied into the lived experiences of families, because, the biggest question of a 7th grader's life is, do people like me? Do I like me? And if they're wrestling with, do I like me? The history of the church isn't very relevant or, quite frankly, noteworthy to them in that experience. And so we have to make sure that we are taking the time to address the real stuff of their lives. And then it continues, the community is in this effort to bring evangelization and catechesis into families, marks out paths of faith that should help them to have a clear awareness of their own identity and mission. It accompanies them and supports them in their task of transmitting life. It helps them in the exercise of their inherent duty of education and promotes authentic family spirituality. So when we first started working on the resource guide for family catechesis, this was one of the big questions that we as a staff and as a product development team really wrestled with. It was that catechesis has to address those big questions. It has to incorporate that stuff that keeps us up at night and the stuff that makes us dance with joy. And so when we first set out to say, what do we want to say about family catechesis? I kept feeling on my heart, how do we help families hear the good news when the bad news of their life requires so much attention right now? When I worked for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, we did a survey of parents of junior high aged youth. And so one of the questions that we asked for them was, what do you want for your child from their experience of faith formation? The most common response was actually, nobody's ever asked me this before. But we had one parent, and this just resonates with me. We had a parent who said, honestly, I just want her to be a good person, and this is the only way I know how to do that. And so, when we think of what are parents' intentions for why they are, if you want your child to be a lifelong disciple, some of them are going, lifelong disciple, I just want them to get through middle school. And so I think that's what the church is reminding us of, that we have to take this vision of discipleship and bring it into the nitty-gritty in the here and now. And so how, when we consider all of our families, do we help them to mark out that path of faith? What are the resources that we can provide for them that help them to find their identity, to settle into a rhythm of spirituality, even if that rhythm of spirituality involves running from soccer game to soccer game every weekend? And when are we having those conversations? How are we creating those relationships with families to be able to have that conversation? So we're going to send you to your breakout room once again. And what I would like you to discuss there is, what ideas do you have for better establishing a reciprocal relationship between families and the faith community? And I know there's some comments over here in the chat, so I know that you have ideas. So once again, Deb, if you could send them back to breakout rooms, and we'll give you about 10 minutes this time. So thank you for once again going to breakout rooms. As you are returning, if you heard a great idea that you would love to share with others, please feel free to drop it in the chat. So again, thank you for that time of sharing. As you are returning, if you have heard a great idea about how to better establish that relationship between families and the faith community, please go ahead and put that in the chat. So I think we're all back now, right, Deb?
Yep.
Yes,
yeah,
perfect. So before I move on, Rachel put this really excellent comment over in the chat, and she says, I think we get caught up in thinking of families to engage as only parents with school-aged children. And there are families in many aspects of parish life not just necessarily families with young children who are in programs run by catechetical leaders. And I want to address that because that is absolutely spot on. And the Directory of Catechesis has a really incredible section on adult faith formation that breaks down kind of the different approaches, the different places that adults might be in their faith formation, and talks about, ideas for engaging them. And it gives specific examples of how should we be engaging parents who are preparing their children for sacraments of initiation, and how do we engage those who are moving into the empty nester stage or who never have children. And so that is absolutely spot on, that all of the things that I have said about families, though I have used examples that are really specific to school age or children, really apply across the board. That, when we are listening to our families of our parish communities, we really should be in tune with those who have lost jobs, those who are caring for the elderly, those who are dealing with mental health issues, that broad scope, that we should be in communication with all of our families, regardless of if they have children. And so there's lots of those ways to approach that conversation. And again, there's a lot of guidance that comes from the Directory for Catechesis. When we talk about the resource guide for family faith, I'm just going to go ahead and say that we wrote that in response to customers and those who use RCLB ministers who use RCLB products, who were addressing mostly those who have school-age children. All of the sessions, all of the things that are involved in there can be adapted to address those other areas of ministry, but you might have to do a little bit of that translation in your own head. So it does talk about broadening that scope beyond just school-age families, but some of those things are particular to that. So I just want to go ahead and name that was our intended audience, but that Rachel is absolutely correct that we need to think of families as all kinds of families. So some of your ideas over here in the chats, they talked about getting families involved with other groups in the parish. So the food pantry, the senior group, doing community service projects in which there's a concrete service together, creating a prayer space with items in your home. And if you don't have an item, how can you use household items? I will tell you, this is something that I have continued, is that when I was working from home, I started lighting a little battery powered candle before I started doing sessions. And so you see, I brought this into the office with me today, just as that adaptation of that prayer space. Having the community adopt a first communicant or confirmandi, I would extend that to parents who are bringing their kids for baptism, those who are in RCIA. And so someone said, so many pastors and parish communities see the DRE as only being focused on children. And that is true. And we have to work that out in your particular setting, that when you start looking at who needs to be in this conversation with me, you may need to be really pushing on the limits of, if you're the DRE and the scope of it is children, who else, which may be volunteers, it may be other ministry leaders, can you pull into that conversation? That's absolutely true. So I copied and pasted so that you could see here what you identified as the obstacles to family faith formation. And so the way this word cloud works is that the bigger the word, the more frequently it appeared. And so you can see the two biggest obstacles that were identified were both time and commitment. And I have to admit, my first thought was, is it commitment on behalf of the parish? Is it the commitment of the minister? Is the commitment of the parents, the families, so I have more questions about that commitment part. But the other thing that I want to point out is the various times that parents appear here. And again, with all I just said about families, there is a lot of focus here, particularly because children have less say in where they get to go because they don't drive. So parents still have that parental influence of what's the rules in their household. Some of you will disagree with me. We know that there are some households where children rule the roost. I have one of those in my family. She's 8. But when you look over here, some of these comments about parents are very compassionate, that parents don't feel prepared, that parents are, it's a little scary for them to lead faith formation. And some of them are maybe a little bit more antagonistic toward parents. And so I want to take just a little bit of time to address the role of what the church says about parents as our partners and children's faith formation in particular. We like to, as DREs, and I say this as a past DRE, I have myself said, you are the principal and first educator of your child. It is from the catechism. Sometimes we use that as a hammer instead of a statement of truth and faith. But it is true, if for no other reason, that parents spend more time with their children than any other adult in their lives, especially in the last year. So parents have more opportunity to form their children. And so that is part of, the church believes this for a variety of reasons, but just the practicality of it is that they are usually at home, even if some of those hours are sleeping, more than they're in school. But the catechism does not say that they are the only educators in faith. And so this is one of those places where we really have to look through a lens of an accompaniment to say what should be the appropriate relationship between parents and the faith community when it comes to faith formation. So in baptism, and I have the text of the order of baptism here, the Christian community pledges to support parents in raising their children in the faith. And we know that parents, what it means to support a family, to support parents, looks different depending on the needs of the family. We have some families that they look like they have it all together, and we know that they would tell you on the other side of that, they're holding it together with chewing gum and Band-Aids. We know that some of our families that have, maybe they have parents who are working multiple jobs, and so they depend on their community to get their kids places, that they depend on other people to get them to extracurriculars. We know that some are multi-generational households. I grew up in one of those, and I know the number of events that I would not have been able to participate in if it weren't for the fact that my grandmother took me when both of my parents were working. So we know that what it means to support in raising a child in the faith is not a one size fits all. And it also talks about that parents, again, in the order of baptism, by word and example, may they prove to be the first witnesses of the faith to their children. And so I want you, as you are considering the role of parents, to be prayerful about what is the kind of support that families need. And so before you just hand over all the books and say, here, you do it, just recognize that some parents will be thrilled. They are looking for that opportunity to be that formal catechist role with their children. And others will be reluctant and they will participate. And some will feel like you have just asked them to teach new math. And so a quick little story here. My sister is a single mom, and she is also a nurse. So during the pandemic, she is considered essential. She had to go to work every day. And so my mom watches my nieces. They are 8 and 13. My mom watches my nieces while my sister works. And so during the stay-at-home order, that was a lot of time that grandma was with these two kids. And my mother is a licensed teacher in the state of Ohio, and she also has a literacy endorsement, okay? I had daily Zoom sessions with my 13-year-old niece about her language arts homework. My mother was more prepared than most people to teach a 13-year-old about language arts. She could read, she could write, she teaches other people's kids, just not my niece. The dynamics of their relationship did not make that a good situation, even though she was completely prepared to be an English teacher, to teach those things. That just was not going to work out between the two of them right now. And I think sometimes we need to remember that some of the formal components of faith formation maybe parents are not the best person to be the teacher of the facts of the faith. Maybe their role is to better be the witnesses of the faith. And so we need to kind of take that into consideration, that it's not always about parents being prepared. It's about that relationship right now is that the parents are not going to be heard. They can still be a witness. they might not be the best teacher. And then how do we help those families to find those other relationships? There is one study, it was cited extensively by the Fuller Theological, the Youth Institute on Growing Young project about churches that engage young people well so that faith sticks. Those young people have 5 people in their faith community that know their name and care about their faith in big, little, and small ways. And I think that that is something to kind of keep in mind, that if we send all of faith formation home, we have to accommodate for those relationships in the faith community that will help support those children, especially through those really difficult, my niece is a good kid, but she's 13. God bless her mother. So just a couple more things to think through here. And so our directory catechesis, again, so much wisdom in this document. It says that it is important for every Christian community to take a realistic view of family reality, that there are ups and downs, and that we are realistic about family life for the sake of accompanying them and helping them to discern the complexity of situations. In essence, it is a matter of reaching out to everyone, of needing to help each person find his or her proper way of participating in the ecclesial community, and to thus experience being touched by unmerited, unconditional, and gratuitous mercy. And so what might this look like if we are saying, let's be realistic about this? I was in a parish and we said, we know some families will do everything and some families will do nothing. So how do we meet those in the middle? And so I worked with the adult faith formation coordinator and the school principal, and we started putting together resources for families that were not too complicated and that did not provide or did not require special supplies unless we provided them. And then we said, what is the normal daily life of a family? What are routines that families go to? And we started looking at how can we help families connect to faith at bedtime, bath time, mealtime, car time, and coming and going. So we picked those 5 areas because we thought most of our families on a regular basis throughout a week had some sort of routine that they followed at bedtime, bath time, mealtime, car time, coming and going. And so how could we connect our lessons? And so at that point, I was in charge of youth formation, which was preschool through high school. And we invited our catechists to give those 5 tips to families. So when you talk about your lesson this week, what are 5 ways that they can connect mealtime, bedtime, bath time, car time, coming and going? 1 sentence, little things. But again, trying to be realistic about what families were able to commit to and how could we support them. And once we got those little ideas going, then we were able to build some momentum where they were feeling more confident, to talk about it's bath time. Let's talk about Noah and the flood. That we were able to resource in a way that made sense within their lived experience on a daily basis. So as you were thinking about what to do in the fall, just remember that families have been through a lot, and parents especially have been through a lot. And so I'm not suggesting that you go back to how it was, but just that you remember that making a huge switch right now without having them in that conversation may be too hard for some of your families. So just keep in mind that might not be your best next step. And so maybe there's an interim step that you need to take before you throw parents completely into the driver's seat. Again, it's just remembering that all of our families are different. And so what was wildly successful at one parish may not be the right next thing to do for your parish. All right, so I just gave you a whole lot to think about. And so I think we're going to do some questions and answers. Are you ready for that, Deborah?
Sure. Yep. Go right ahead.
Jumped into a lot there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I didn't see many direct questions come through the chat. So just to everyone, if you have questions, you can just use your, raise your hand function, or just kind of shout out if no one's talking, and go ahead and start throwing questions back at Amy now.
So while you're thinking about your questions, I'm going to tell you your homework before our next session. So this is your homework. So what now? Gave you a whole lot of things about what the church believes about families, about way that families live, mission, about how we can think about parents as partners. Okay, kind of give you a quick overview of all of those. So now it's time to start moving toward those deeply practical kind of questions. And some of you are already doing this. Some of you are saying, I got this good thing going and I just want to improve it. And that is awesome. And I'm super excited to have that conversation. So what is your homework? The first thing to do is to pray. We cannot underestimate the power of prayer, especially for our families as they are trying to figure out what is normal again. And so pray specifically for those families you thought of at the beginning of the session. What do they need? How can you reach out to them? I know somebody said in one of these questions, families don't respond to surveys. So what's another way to get some feedback from them if they're not answering your survey? Who is a voice that has a relationship with them that maybe they can have that conversation with? And so how can we help our families from all ages, from brand new married couples to the elderly, to those who have, babies who were born close together and, they're just up to their eyeballs in diapers right now. How do we help them to more deeply experience the love and mercy of God, and that just pray fervently for that? The second thing is that we're going to send you a little assessment that says, are we family friendly? And I'm asking you to complete this assessment before you come back to our next session. And so you're going to notice two things. First of all, it asks you to rank how well do you do the questions there, but also how important is it? I have a very good friend who says that often we can do the wrong things really well. So think about how important is it to your families that you do some of those things that are included there. And then thirdly, I would like for you to think about, what do your families need from their faith community right now? And invite others to be part of that conversation with you, even if it's just a quick text message exchange, or if you call somebody up and say, I'm thinking through this, what's important to you? You can do this with your own family members. What was important from your faith community? How did that work? So it doesn't have to be families in your program. That's great. It can be other ministers. It can be some of the people you're gathered with today. But what do families need right now? And then think about what model, what next step, what are you not doing that you could do next, that is the next right size step in the faithful direction to continue to build that good relationship between parishes and families. And I'm going to stop talking now.
Great questions. Let's hear them. Or if there was something that came up in your discussion groups, that you wanted to extend further, please hop in. Or you could throw it in the chat if you don't want to talk.
I will talk. I'm the one that always talks. I guess my question would be, these are all very sound and practical goals to strive towards. I think my concern is being a parish that is in the process of merging. So this year, we were told that each of us, in our particular scenario, we just keep things as they are. And as this year progresses, we'll be talking about next season, when it will actually be one new parish, new entity. What will faith formation look like at that time? So for me, I'm just I can do this, for my community right now, but my community is going to be shifting. So this makes it a little more challenging right now for me to kind of figure out, well, what do I do with this? I want to move toward this. It's a whole reason why I started a family faith formation. And for me, in the scenario that I'm in, that actually began mainly out of families coming to us with older children who were baptized but uncatechized. Mm-hmm. And they were seeking sacraments. So that's where I started a family faith formation that was kind of quasi RCIA adapted for children, but by the same token, family oriented. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I think that's a really great question, and a very, we have lots of, what do you do when you're a parish in transition? So some of you maybe aren't in that same case, but we know we're getting a new pastor. We know our pastor's going to retire, or, this or that, and I think there are still middle steps that we can take. And so one would be that I would be very intentional, first of all, of asking people to pray with you about how are you going to minister to families through this transition? How are we going to accompany our families to ensure that nobody slips through the cracks as we make this transition? So that would be kind of my first priority, is those relationships. So number one, in prayer, who can be your prayer warrior in that and joining you in that time. And then the second thing is to really focus on that strategy of, maybe you're not moving toward a parent-led faith formation right now, but how are you going to engage families so that they don't feel like they've been abandoned in that transition as well? And that might be your family ministry right now, is to have that conversation, to be intentional about helping families feel like they have someone to talk with when they're like, I don't know what's happening. Why is this happening to my parish? But also those who are like, I didn't know this was a thing and I'm just here for a sacrament, because parents are all over the place. So I think that could be your family ministry right now, is to think about, how do we accompany them through this transition, keeping an eye on what are the things that they can do at home? What are the things that will remain the same in our faith? That's a tremendous catechetical moment to say, our parish structure is shifting, but here's what it means to be a universal church. And so I think I would take some of those anxieties and some of those joys and that grief, all of those are part of a parish transition, and really focus on, how can I help accompany families through this time with that eye toward, we will be moving to something that is a more formally structured family catechesis in the future. So I would just be very present in this real moment of those anxieties and joys. And I know it sounds trite, but it's a lot. That's a ton to take on. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be praying for you, because that's hard stuff.
Greatly appreciated.
Mm-hmm. All right. Deb.
Yes.
When you send the survey, will you just go ahead and send my email address?
Yes.
That if you all have a question, or some of you said I hope you address these things, and I have that prepared for our next time. So we will address those things. But if you have a question or something specific that you would like to ask me, please feel free to send me an email. I would love to help you think through what is that next right step for your parish. In the meantime, George, I think you had a couple of comments that you wanted to make.
I do. I'm George Barrett again. I'm the parish sales representative for the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I work with the parishes in your diocese. This coming week, I would probably say next Monday, each of you will be receiving from the Archdiocese, or from us at RCL Benziger, the family resource guide that will kind of help you understand, kind of give you the theory of what Amy has just talked about. In fact, she's one of the co-authors of this guide, but it also will start to give you those step-by-step approaches that will really help you. So when Mary Ellen talked about what to do next, praying is being with one person, but also doing some assessment and looking and dreaming and visioning. That's going to be one resource that the diocese is going to provide for you. And then RCL Benziger is going to provide for you our another series of our family branded programs. Is called Our Family Gathers. And it is an online resource that will be given to each of you that will help you with seasonal you as directors or leaders in the parish to really celebrate with families the seasonal celebrations, but also to give families resources to celebrate on their own. And so I thought it would be a wonderful free resource for you for this first year to kind of test the grounds and get in there and try this. At RCL Benziger, we're really here to help you and guide you in this process of family faith formation. It's not just saying, okay, buy this book, but really help you get things started so that you can use any resource out there to really help guide families. And so I want to thank Deb and also Amy. Just Deb, thank you for your invitation. And then Amy, thank you. Excellent as always. And I'll turn it back to Deb.
All right, great. Okay, so Amy mentioned, the homework, that assessment. So I will be emailing that again, along with Amy's contact information. And then that assessment is also in the book, as is the opening prayer that I used on those slides. I pulled that directly from the resource guide as well. So you'll have that in the book, but I'll email it in case you want to, start looking at it before you actually get your book. And that's it for now. So, we thank you for joining us today. If you have a question and you want to linger a little bit and ask us, after it kind of quiets down, that's fine if you have a particular situation. But that's it for today. We look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. And then, we'll take a deeper dive at the resource guide and then look more at strategies and, practical steps that you can take at that point. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your time today.